Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning,
Good
everybody.
morning.
Good
Good
morning.
morning.
Good morning, friends. Those who are part of this webinar, we can see many new faces and some of our old friends, those who are sitting in front of their laptops or their computers from different parts of the world. I could see even people, those who are participating in the seminar, even from California. Well, we are not very sure that how many will come finally will become part of this webinar through Zoom, because we have only very limited spaces available for this. Precisely that reason, we have made other arrangements to simultaneously convey or communicate our proceedings through Facebook and YouTube. So that means, as usual, number of other people also will be watching, or they are participating this webinar from different parts of the world, not only from Asia and even beyond Asia. Well, it is my great pleasure and privilege to welcome each and every one of you to this webinar, which is being organized by the Christian Conference of Asia. This is the 8th one in a series of webinars we have started organizing since last March. We already addressed a number of issues. And then this particular webinar, this is focusing on the issues related with growing religious intolerance or religious extremism and its impacts on women in Asia. We have with us a number of panelists. They are coming from a different or diverse backgrounds. Several of them, or some of them, are actually directly involved in human rights related activities. They have been heading some of the human rights organizations, and also at the same time some others, those who have been focusing on human rights but coming from the academic arena, and also those who are relating with different faith-based organizations also are part of this panelist. We know one thing, that this is a crucial issue now in the Asian context. We also know the fact that a fundamental aspect of the constitutions of almost every Asian country is that equal rights should be provided to both men and women. But there exists a wide gap between theory and practice. So the condition of women and men, for instance, is one of systematic subordination, then that is determined by the forces of patriarchy across classes or regions and rural or urban divides, or economically backward country or advanced country. There are variations. One thing is very clear, that across Asia, the rise of hardline religious movements is fueling nationalism and also adding more religious intolerance these days and creating new dangerous fault lines in communities or within communities. So this trend is evident in several Asian countries, irrespective of their religious affiliations or identities, whether it is in Islamic majority countries such as Pakistan, Indonesia, Bangladesh, or Malaysia, where the rise of political Islam as well as resurgence of Islamic fundamentalist groups are responsible for mainly creating this religious intolerance. That is on the one side. Then the majority Hindu religious, majority religious countries such as in India and also in Nepal, where the fundamentalists and the extremist groups are responsible for adding more religious intolerance these days, or religious extremism in these days. And the other countries like the Theravada Buddhist countries such as in Bangladesh, in Myanmar, then Thailand, Laos, Cambodia, Sri Lanka. There also we see that in our day-to-day life, these fundamentalist and extremist groups in the name of Buddhism those who are active in the name of protecting Buddhism, and at the same time, they are very much involved in creating more havoc in society. So some of these issues will be addressed, and then ultimately, the question we will be addressing basically will be how this growing trend of religious intolerance and religious extremism, how this is affecting women across Asia. Not only because religious extremism or religious intolerance that is actually growing, at the same time, historically and traditionally, we know that some of the religions or most of the religions are known for their intolerance towards women. And how far this trend has been intensified in these days, mainly because of this religious intolerance and religious extremism. These are the things that we are going to look at these sessions with the help of our resource persons and panelists. We have now with us the panelists, Mr. Basil Fernando, who is a well-known human rights activist, human rights defender, who used to be a United Nations officials in Hong Kong and also in Cambodia during the time of the United Nations Transitional Authority in Cambodia, was functioning in Cambodia, and he was heading the human rights division of that special mission there. We have with us Ms. Leslie Davids, who is representing United Nations Women's Regional Office, Asia Pacific Regional Office. She is actually heading the unit on governance, peace, and security. She is an analyst of the governance, peace, and security division of the United Nations Women. The other panelist is Professor Dr. Sarasu Esther Thomas, who is currently the registrar of the prestigious National Law School, India University. This is an internationally reputed law university in India. She serves as the registrar, and she is well known for her incredibly popular family law course, which she has been offering at the National Law School University. And also she has been focusing mainly on national and international human rights issues. Ms. Azia Nazir from Pakistan. Ms. Nazir was a member of Pakistan's parliament, and she is a chairperson of Pakistan Christian Forum. She is a seasoned politician, and she was acknowledged as a human rights activist and social worker in Pakistan. Ms. Amira Lidasan, who is from Mindanao, the Philippines, a Moro woman leader and General Secretary of the Moro Christian People's Alliance and spokesperson of Suara Bangsa Moro. We know that we will hear more about these Moro-related issues in Mindanao in the southern Philippines. And as you know that predominantly Philippines is a Christian country, where this Mindanao region, there by and large, they have more Muslims, especially the ethnic Muslim community, and some of those issues related with the persecution or human rights violations and the rampant militarization. This will be shared by Amira. Ms. Devi Rubiandi Khalifa from Indonesia. She currently serves as the director of the Asian Muslim Action Network. She is active in writing in journals on women's issues and minority rights issues and role of women in peace building, and she has been involved in all these areas. Ms. Nandita Biswas, Bangladesh. She is a youth secretary of the National Council of Churches in Bangladesh. And also she is involved in the commission, Pakistan's law commissions dealing
Bangladesh
with
law
Bangladesh Minority Bangladesh Law Commission dealing with minority related issues, especially the Christian personal law amendments related issues. She represents the Christian community in Bangladesh in this particular forum. So these are the panelists, those who will be speaking to us. And of course, suggestions have been already conveyed and communicated to all these panelists with regard to the timing and also the sequence. And then we hope that we will be able to finish everything within 2 hours of time. And I welcome each and every one of you, and we hope that this will be a fruitful exercise when we will be discussing further on this particular issue. So thank you very much, friends. And may I now request the first speaker, Miss Leslie Davies from UN, to give us an overview of the impact of growing religious extremism on women in Asia. In this particular segment, we will have 2 speakers. Each one will speak maximum 5 minutes. Both of them will give perspectives on this particular concern, growing religious extremism on women in Asia, with the specific examples from their own direct involvement in different Asian countries, or how their respective organizations have been addressing these issues. What are the important or cardinal issues they have so far identified, and how the international community to address some of these issues. That part we will take up again towards the end of it. But now they are requested to give an overview about the situation, growing religious extremism on women in Asia. May I request Ms. Leslie Davies to speak first, and then after that, Mr. Basil Fernando.
Hi, good morning, or good afternoon. Thank you so much to the Christian Conference of Asia and Dr. Matthews for inviting UN Women to take part in this conversation. And I also wanted to thank and acknowledge my fellow panelists. I'm really looking forward to learning from you today. My name is Leslie Davis, and I work for the UN Women Regional Office for Asia and the Pacific, based out of Bangkok. Right now, I'm actually joining you from my home in Hawaii, as I haven't been able to actually get back to Thailand since COVID hit. So for the last 4 years, UN Women has been implementing a program to empower women in Asia to prevent violent extremism in their communities. This program started out looking at Muslim majority countries in Asia, but we've since expanded the project to include other countries in the region. So for the next 5 minutes or so, I'd just like to kind of elaborate some of what we've learned through working on this project, and especially set the scene with some of the interesting findings of recent UN Women research in the region. And I just want to note that a lot of our research looks at the concept of violent extremism, and I know that this conference is looking at particularly just religious extremism, but I think this is still really relevant for our discussion because we know that these kind of operate on a continuum or on a spectrum. So the first kind of regional trend that I wanted to touch on is that extremist ideologies are very often underpinned by gender stereotypes. These we often see are the core values of extremist groups in the region. So what does this mean? This means that groups have specific and very rigid ideas about what does it mean to be a man and what does it mean to be a woman, and how an individual should exercise his masculinity or her femininity. And our research shows that extremist groups can utilize these like rigid gender roles to actually recruit men and women to join their cause. So for example, extremist groups can be perceived as a way for men to kind of reclaim their traditionally manly roles, like their manhood, when women in their community are getting increasing power and autonomy. And likewise, we often see that religious leaders are promoting a very patriarchal and authoritative stance on human rights that upholds the male-dominated status quo in society. So the effect of this is, of course, that women's rights are curtailed in practice. So some examples of this could be, for example, bans on women's movement. So maybe women not allowed to leave their house or to join certain religious events. This could be restrictions on how women should dress. So maybe forcing modest dress on women, or forcing religiously significant clothing items on women, and also control over women's reproductive rights. So this could be in the form of groups expressing that it's women's duty to have children to create more followers to these extremist religious groups, or the opposite when it comes to religious minorities, where we see accusations of women trying to reproduce rapidly in order to increase the number of individuals in the religious minority. And what we know is that extremist groups can sometimes use violence against women as a means to reinforce these really rigid gender norms. So we see this idea of men as both protectors of women, yet at the same time, enforcers of women's assigned roles. So men might want to protect women from other men, or perhaps protect a woman's modesty or her purity. But at the same time, they're policing women's actions both inside and outside the home, oftentimes by using violence. The second kind of regional trend that I wanted to discuss is something recent UN Women research found, which is that misogyny, or fear and hatred of women or the feminine, misogyny is more closely linked to views supporting extremist violence in the name of religion than any other factor, including religiosity. So misogyny is more closely linked to extremist violence than any other factor. So UN Women partnered with the Monash Gender, Peace and Security Center from Monash University in Australia to produce a research that looked at how and why are societal gender identities and relations drivers of violent extremism. And how we did this was through survey research and through qualitative research in 3 countries in Asia: Bangladesh, Indonesia, and the Philippines. And what we found is that hostile sexist attitudes towards women and support for violence against women are the factors most strongly associated with support for violent extremism. And in fact, people who support violent extremism, or sorry, violence against women, are 3 times more likely to support violent extremism. This same research didn't find any significant relationship between religiosity, age, gender, or level of education in support for violent extremism. So these findings tell us that what I think we all know, it's not the religion that's calling people to this extremism by any means. And the third kind of major trend that I wanted to point out today in my time is that COVID and kind of COVID associated like mitigation measures and lockdowns have actually affected online extremism and online misogynists. So UN Women recently partnered with an organization called Mythos Labs to explore how COVID affected online extremists and their use of misogyny. We created a data set in 9 languages consisting of over 500 misogynistic words and phrases. And we used algorithms to search Twitter and Facebook for tweets and posts during the lockdown periods from April 23rd to June 5th. And we also conducted data using Google Trends. So firstly, what this research found was that the volume and interest in misogynistic content online actually increased during the COVID-19 lockdowns. So in 5 countries where we did the Google Trends analysis, that's Sri Lanka, India, the Philippines, Malaysia, and Indonesia, we saw spikes in relative search volumes for misogynistic profanity, terms like whore and slut, during the period related to the lockdown. And we also saw that misogynistic activity on Twitter and Facebook increased dramatically during the lockdown period. And the second thing that we found with this research that's really troubling is actually that these kind of extreme views of misogynist Twitter accounts had a disproportionate impact on the attitudes of their followers. The researchers determined that misogynistic accounts, on average, made their followers 22% more misogynistic This is extremely troubling because we've already demonstrated the link between misogyny and forms of extremism and kind of extreme religious groups. Also, we see like online hate speech against women stops women from participating in her community. It keeps women politicians from winning offices. It silences our online activism. And also, it can cross over into real physical harm. So we really see that the impact of COVID-19 have simultaneously increased gender inequalities in our region, while also exposing women to new and evolving threats from extremism and extremist violence. So these are the three trends that I kind of wanted to touch on during my time here. And I think that Mr. Basil will probably have a lot more really interesting information to share with us. So I'll go ahead and turn over my time. Thank you.
You're muted, Dr. Matthews. Please unmute.
Mr. Basil Fernando.
I think the one of the things that we need, first of all, to do to make a more clear understanding is to leading this towards religious and extremism. Pretended religion is one thing, but religion is about love, about compassion, and about the embracing the other and developing together. So if you have a extremism of that, that will be fine. That will be a very good world. So what we are in fact talking about is the use of violence in order to promote certain activities under the pretext of religion. And that is the problem. It is not the religions that is the problem, but the world over, and in my presentation, I will concentrate more on Asia. There is the use of violence in the most extreme form in everything. And there is a certain tolerance that is growing to heartlessness in politics, in social life. And this situation has also uses the religion for other purposes. As one famous journalist said, everything is about something else. The violence is not about religion, it's about sometimes territorial extensions. Sometimes it is a political advantage over one group or the other. Sometimes the unfair competition whereby attempts are made to get more for oneself or one's group or one's gender, rather than having a fair field. So these are the problems we are faced with everywhere. Now you know that among the countries that most extreme form of this religious endangered conflicts, engendered conflicts. The religion, under pretext of religion, the conflicts that are taking place, South Asia is the worst. And the South Asian conflicts, if you closely study, is about various kinds of political conflicts territorial conflict, particularly territorial conflict, and also misunderstood problems about electoral politics. The religion is made use of in order to divide and to build a basis for some groups, which necessarily requires building antagonisms against other groups. So it is an artificially built, completely artificially built, but very deep, because today's warfare, and this is a warfare we are talking about, is about psychology. The psychological warfare on every front, including the religious front, is against a greater sharing of resources among the people and enlarging the scope for particularly the less privileged groups in the past, so that they can enter into the field and get a larger say and larger participation. Modern developments everywhere, but particularly in less developed countries, is against participation. And the way naturally the women are the worst affected in the area, because in the past history, their scope for the participation was limited. And we were seeing, fortunately, some developments in the recent decades of expansion of this area in favor of women. But what we see now more and more is an attempt to push this trend back in order that the status quo of non-sharing culture, culture that opposes sharing, is coming back with a kind of ideologies that are so difficult to fight against. Because today the greatest weapon in order to promote discrimination, in order to promote violence on various sectors, including violence against women, is the media and the communication networks that are being misused for the purpose of misinformation, fake news, shaming of people, and depriving the genuine voices to emerge, instead to have more fake voices all the time being brought to our homes, to our people, so that we are inundated all the time, not on the news and ideas about the things that matter to us, but things which divert us from our attention. So therefore, there is a grave crisis. And what is one of the solutions? One of the solutions is religion itself. We need the culture of compassion to be brought back. That is religion. Religion is about the culture of compassion. There's nothing closer to religion in psychology than feminism. It is women, the side of all of us. In all of us, there are two sides, as the psychologists say. And that side which represent the feminist aspect is the best side, which brings up the better side of human beings, the compassion, the extension of love, and also concern for new generations. One of the worst aspects of this violence that is going on is that we will find more and more parents everywhere finds that the environment in which their children are growing is not conducive to human growth. Instead, we deliberately create the kind of animal instincts kind of competition that is the worst the worst levels of competition where we try to destroy each other. So these are the challenges, but for which once again the reply, in the reply, it is not possible to fight the violence against by violence means. Fighting kind of psychologies of fighting by just fighting the same weapons. The weapon that the world needs most, as Dalai Lama keep on reminding, is the weapon of compassion, weapons of understanding and kindness. And these, unless we cultivate and bring these, not shy about these things, then the cultural trend in the world and also our region is going against religions. That is the problem. These people who use violence under the name of the religion is merely using psychology that is well developed. Fight to the last, fight to the bitter end, that destroy. That's the idea. When you, of course, I don't want to take time to give examples, and the horrendous examples of just killing the innocent, which includes women, children, and old people, everybody, regardless, is considered for them, within quotes, religious ideal. Of course, we know that it is not, but that is being portrayed. So the persona that is built is destroy, and that is that is what we are seeing, even in countries which are much more developed, which is having a drastic consequences even in the developed world. So this is a short introduction to begin with. I hope as we go on, we can, after hearing others, we can try to come to the grips of this problem.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Fernando. Friends, we have heard that religion itself is not the real problem, but at the same time, there are various other factors. So both panelists, they tried to pinpoint some of the issues from their own perspectives. So in the next segments, we will be addressing specific context of religious extremism and its impact on women from some of the Asian countries. That doesn't mean that we are identifying the problem is only existing only in these 4 or 5 or 6 countries, but these are some of the selected areas we try to address now. And we have already informed the panelists about the order of their presentations, but I will be making slight changes because we don't want to group all the Islamic countries in the same slot and then some other countries in a different way. So here, the first presenter will be Ms. Asiya Nasir, and the second presenter will be Professor Dr. Cedaw Thomas from India. And then the third one will be Rubiandi from Indonesia. And the fourth one, Nandita Biswas. And the fifth one, Amira Ali Lidasan. This is, I reorganized this mainly not to give the impression that we are taking up only the Islamic countries as the first targets. Well, that is not the original intention, but when we worked out the details, it became in such a way that the sequence was arranged. So the first speaker, Ms. Asiya Nasir in this segment, and the second one will be Dr. Cedaw Thomas. We shall start with Ms. Nasir.
You need unmute.
Okay.
I'm really sorry. So thank you very much, Dr. Matthews, and thank you very much, all of you, especially Christian Conference of Asia, for organizing this webinar, because I think that it's most timely and it's most needed that the voice of the religious minorities, especially the women of those minorities, to be heard across the globe. because what we have observed that as it was already, we were hearing that whenever there is war or conflict or wherever there is any such situation, women and children, they are the worst and the most hit. So uh, what I want to present today is the case of the Pakistani Christian women here, not only Pakistani Christian women, but also women of the other faiths who are suffering here in Pakistan at the hands of extremism. Since we all know that extremism has emerged as a global phenomena, and it has really affected, or I must say that influenced the life of my women belonging to different faiths in living in different parts of the world. And similarly, it has affected the lives of the women, especially the Christian women in Pakistan. And the Christian women in Pakistan, they are victims of double jeopardy. And because they are marginalized, they are living on the edges. And I must say that it's not only that they are victimized or they are harassed or they are suffering at the hands of the majority groups or other faith, but many times we see that inside our own religion, our women, they are facing a lot of discrimination, lot of biases. So we have to face within our own religion, within our own churches and community, and then we set out to go out to work or participate in the public life where the women belonging to the minorities, especially the Christian women, they are observed as the soft target or as a very easy target. So over the years, we have experienced that one of the phenomena which has taken place here, especially in Pakistan, is of forced conversions and forced marriages. So women of the minority groups, they are taken into marriage, the bonds of marriage, and they are forcefully converted to other religions. So we are raising this question that why only our girls and women, why not our boys and men, why only women are taken to be a part of their religion or part of their agenda. So women in Pakistan, as I said, that they are marginalized. Most of them, they are badly, extremely hit by poverty and other domestic issues due to which they go out to work and then they are targeted. They are victimized of forced conversion and forced marriages. And during this pandemic, we have seen that there is extreme rise in these cases. There have been multiple cases during over a few months. We have seen, and the worst thing is that we are facing impunity of law also here in Pakistan. So even the laws, they don't even support the women, and we see that ultimately by hook or crook, those girls, the minors, especially I must mention here, the most of the girls who are victimized of forced marriage and conversions, they are minors below age of 15 or below age of 10 even. So our question is that we do agree that women, they can fall in love and they go and get married to men of other religions, but why only minor girls? Because they are why are the minor girls, and how can a minor child of 10, 9 or 11, 13 decide of their religion while they don't know much about their own religion? So these are some of the issues which are facing at the hands of the extremist mindset here in Pakistan. And secondly, I just want to raise here that within our own church circles, over the years, even the church has not been prepared to uh, to to address the issues with the changing world or with the changing environment, because still we are too much complex and entangled with our family laws, with our marriage laws. Still our divorce laws are in the pipeline and they are not being settled because there is no consent among different denominations and congregations. So ultimately the victim is the women again. So she is victim of the domestic violence, and then she is the victim of forced conversions, forced marriages, and there are several other issues related to women. Their health issues are there, and I must say that it's not extremism is a mindset, not only if we call that we say that it's only cannot confine it to one religion. It varies, and it is almost found in all the religions. So at the upper level, we see that many times that our religious leadership that has that mindset, and that's not letting the women to grow, letting the women to live their lives happily or prosperously. So these were some of the cases which I really wanted to highlight, that now time has come that we always say that the church needs to come forward, church needs to fulfill its responsibility, and the church needs to cater uh, the women, because women are the most integral and the most important part of their congregation and the church. So if we're not going to take care of our girls, our coming generations of our women, I think that it will be very alarming, and it's thought provoking for us in the coming days. So I must say that yes, we do agree that women belonging to all religions are being victimized, but somewhere, wherever they are in minority, and in some other part of the world where we are in majority, we are victimizing some other women. So I think that this should be stopped, and UN Women and United Nations should take some affirmative actions and measures, and needs to review their policies, especially Article 18 of the United Nations Charter, and it should include some very, I must say that policies for the women specifically, to address the I must say that to address the issues related to women, especially to the forced conversions, forced marriages, because I think that today we are living in 21st century, and I think that we are looking forward that we should not repeat the errors and the mistakes which we have made in the past during the war times. Now I think that things are changing, scenarios are changing, and women has all the right to live her life according to her own wishes and according to her own religion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Nasir. Next, Dr. Sarasu Esther Thomas.
Good morning, everyone. I hope I'm audible.
Yes.
Thank you, Dr. Chunakara and friends, for inviting me to this webinar. As Mr. Basil Fernando pointed out, women are oppressed everywhere. And while not forgetting that women are first and foremost oppressed by their own communities, I will be focusing on religious extremism and its impact on women in India. So in India, this has taken the form of what we all know as Hindutva, which is the political ideology often simply labeled as Hindu nationalism. And as stated by Leslie, this is coupled with a number of gender stereotypes, many of which have been propagated and strengthened over the recent past. And in the next few minutes, I would like to focus on how this has impacted women in India. While I could go on and on, I thought I would focus on 5 major stereotypes which have been relevant in the recent past. The first stereotype is that women are tricked into converting to a minority faith. And this has especially been applied with regard to women who are considered to be majority women or majority community women. And everyone who's involved in this process of converting this woman into a minority faith could be prosecuted. And I will deal more about this when we deal with the section on laws. The second, it is, of course, the presumption is also that these women are foolish and know no better, and that they can be easily tricked. So it is, in a sense, a denial of women's agency, that they choose to do so on their own. The second stereotype is that men, particularly Muslim men, lure women into marriages in order to convert them. And this is a term which has often been called love jihad. And we even had a number of situations where this came up before courts, where courts and studies have clearly debunked the notion that such a thing happens. But because of the fact that this is coupled with polygamy, which is among all the religion-based personal laws in India, only Muslim law allows polygamy. So a bogey of a love jihad coupled with polygamy often ends up in different forms of violence against the women who enter into such marriages, as also the men. The third stereotype that we have is that Indian Hindu values are being threatened and we need to protect them. So we see a range of these protections. More recently, you may have read about the impending beef bans, or what is often called the cow protection maneuvers, ordinances and laws, which are being tabled. But this is also true, especially where women are concerned. In most communities, we see that women are considered to be the repository of culture, and women are supposed to uphold the culture. And everything that women do seems to bring a slur or a black mark upon cultural values. So this has to do both with regard to women's sexuality, the way women dress, the fact that women may be exposed to education and may have different views, may choose to want to marry a person of their choice, and so on. So this has also created its own set of problems. The fourth and a very disturbing one is that women, particularly from marginalized groups, tend to lie, especially where there is heinous violence like rape against them. And fifthly, that minority women need to be protected from their male counterparts. And the majority is what is bringing about changes in personal laws in order to ensure this. So that there are these five stereotypes which are being propagated. The current context has increased this and increased vulnerabilities of women and increased negative impact of women because of two reasons. One is the pandemic, and the other is the falling sex ratio. In both these areas, my research center has been doing some work. The pandemic has increased women's vulnerability because they are stuck with families. It has increased child marriage. And in the context of the persecution of minorities, we see that there has been a prevention of love marriages because women can't go away and marry, and arranged marriage, and they have sometimes been forced into arranged marriages. The falling sex ratio in India, where sex ratio has been falling from 927 girls to 1,000 boys being born to, I think, 914 in the last census in 2011 to today's range of about 899 is the prediction. So women are being seen as scarce commodities in some communities, and the policing on them has increased so that they don't defect to other communities in the form of marriage. So these are five stereotypes and two current concerns which I think haven't received adequate attention, and I'm happy to present them to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Thomas. Now, Rubianti Khalifa from Indonesia.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hello everyone. Good afternoon from Indonesia. I'm going to congratulate for Christian Conference in Asia to host this seminar. In particular, it's very important and timely. We're talking about the intolerance, the growing of intolerance, as well as the extremism, in particular highlighted the impact to women. So let me make clear about the two terms that actually been used interchangeable. One is intolerance. It is unwillingness to accept views, belief, or behavior that different from one's So it is different totally when we talk about violent extremism, which is more an effort to encouraging, justifying, and supporting the commission of a violent act to achieve political or ideological or religious goals. So, however, why it is two important situations need to be tackled together. Once, because the intolerance, when you see growing of intolerance, meaning that it provides a fertile ground for extremism. So therefore, we need to really seriously tackling intolerance. What are the other consequences of the intolerance? Number one is actually we will see the promotion of sectarian political mission more and more, and popularizing identity politics. I believe in your country, my country, very common that we use. We see the political parties currently use a lot the identity politics to win the election. I can give you an example in Indonesia, the election in Jakarta that actually bring a lot of lesson from all of us, but never stop the political party to keeping using the identity politic as the as the means to win the election. Number two, I think I would like to highlight relating with increasing vulnerability for minority group. When you have a growing number of intolerance, make sure that we'll be sure, and it is in the context of Indonesia, that minority group will be threatened, also will attacked by a certain group because of the religious superiority, or because of the they don't agree with the differences. The other important thing is actually in the community, we will see that the shrinking space of the exchange learning, and because people avoiding to engage with dialogue and learning from others. So what is the impact to the women? I have three important things to mention here. Number one is, before that, one of the characteristic of the intolerance group, aside they promote single truth, exclusivism against differences, they also bringing misogynic interpretation to the role of women. I think Leslie highlighted before, and many of the propaganda in the social media against women's rights, including against feminism. So what are the impacts to the women? Sure, number one is the prevention of women from the political participation, because with a very narrow-minded interpretation that they are using, both using the cultural justification or using religious justification, that they are actually prevent women in public participation. I think many cases can be evident. One is actually including the context where Aceh in the post-conflict situation, the women getting more and more difficult in engaging political participation. Number two is actually hindering effort to tackle gender-based violence. Why? Because they don't see a gender-based violence exists. They denial about the gender-based violence. It is because the women, it is because the women cannot protect themselves, because the women incapable. It's all about the women that actually causes of gender-based violence. So then when the intolerance growing, the effort on tackling, on providing long-term support for the victim of gender-based violence, perhaps also very weak. And the last one is the intolerance group tend to value the agenda of the women's rights, because in many cases, they're actually targeting any kind of the women agenda should not be actually promoted because the women place is actually inside the home. So what is the difference with extremist group is in the way they are playing the narrative, the gender narrative. I may say that in the context of Indonesia, the way we're looking at the violent extremism is no longer using binary opposition views, because currently the extremist group are very much using the gender narrative that seems to really offering empowerment as well as more better position to the women. Therefore, one of the reasons why women actually attracted by a violent extremist ideology is because they are seeking empowerment, or because they are seeking security, or because they are seeking better situation, which actually can be offered by the extremist group. And lastly, because of the changings of the trend of violent extremism from backyard to dining room, from illegal, from unseen, from male-dominated actors to the very open and engaged the family member. Therefore, the way we're looking at the violent extremism need to be shifted, need to be transformed, yeah, and looking at the women by really understanding the each factors, the each push and pull factors that actually driving women into violent extremism, which one women and the other women may be and definitely different. So by understanding that, we may be able to really looking at how serious gender injustice and inequality being used or being influenced women engage in violent extremism. So I should end that, and we'll add more later on regarding with the legal reform in Indonesia. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Khalifa. Ms. Nandita Bonia Biswas.
Thank you to CCA for arranging this webinar, because in Bangladesh at this COVID pandemic time, violence against women are increasing. So it's very essential to addressing this issue. Actually, Bangladesh accommodate almost 180 million people, equally divided by men and women. Impact on the total population here. Women mostly lives in the rural area, follow religious practices, and because of their no education or no poor education, toward these ill doctrines. Rape and other forms of sexual violence, child marriage, body shaming mentality, domestic violence, acid violence, violence by trafficking, and social media violence are very common in our day-to-day life. Sometimes women and girls, children dominated by law, religious scripture, and religious leaders also. Actually, Bangladesh taking the political instability preventing here for last few decades, the Islamist political parties visible secular and extremists are quite active and offering Islamic Khalifa or Islamic government as a visible alternative of the existing democratic process. Because of the massive corruption, nepotism, and mendicity among major political parties, these Islamic groups are become more vocal and presenting themselves as the ideal group capable making sustainable change in social and economical order. Political use of the Islam is not new here. In practical form, when this Islamic group tend to introduce Khalifa or Islamic government, two major groups are here in Bangladesh immediately become their target are and prey, and the first group is minority people, obviously Hindu, um, Christian, and Buddhist also, and The other groups is the women. I mean, all women in Bangladesh in general, imposing different religious practices, mainly concentrated at the dress code, like wearing hijab and local cloth covering almost whole body being imposed. And as a part of their propagation of Islam within cruel intention to cover people of their faith communities, they forcefully imposed a lot of rules not in line with the religious and social practice of these smaller faith communities, um, falling to impose this practice. Either the Islamic groups practice forcefully implemented um, of their values and rules, not in the lines either with the modern society or minority faith communities. Through the Constitution of Bangladesh remains secular and allowing people of all religious groups and gender to practicing their own religious and social norms. But sadly, that is often been and, and hindered by the growing religious intolerance from this Islamic group. In the recent year, women participating the greater society and job market, so the social landscape is changing, and we hope lies in the future. Equally, it's true that religious institutions, both in government and private sector, are increasing mode of producing high number of Islamic education graduate having no secular education, but only the Islamic education. So these hang Islamic graduate are in use spread hatred against smaller religious group and women practicing all Islamic code against women. Especially we hear it from Pakistan and India, that is love jihad, like this. Education and upliftment of women as money earners are two important challenges to um, entertain. And unless the massive girl in rural area are educated and become economic human being, this religious extremism is sometimes shall prevail and would rule in the life of women in Bangladesh. Sadly true, conversely, it's highly educated women into Islamic fantasy are growing here, acting as tools to attract other young educated women and therefore members of increasing in the recent days. Government and different women groups and religious organizations are actively working to our different social religious bodies may influence mind and practice of people here, um, to value women as human being equal to man and norms practices in our social life. A law alone cannot communicate ethics and norms. So time is changing, if not too fast, but fast enough, and some good time be visible in coming days. And especially church or religious organization um, should take responsibility of these issues to reduce extremism and violence against women. We can work together with the different religious groups and religious leaders and institutions also. And thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Nandita Biswas. Our next speaker in this segment is Ms. Almira Ali Lidasan.
Hello, Assalamualaikum. I'll just show my face briefly, but hello, Assalamualaikum. Yeah, just a proof that I am with you, but I have to close this video because I have a difficulty in my internet connections. Anyway, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak about extremism and to also clarify that there are in the Philippines, that there are movements or Islamic movements in the Philippines that are not necessarily connected with extremism. You know. Muslims in the Philippines, just like what CCA have said, is a minority. We compose of the only in the recent statistics 6.01% in the Philippine population. That's roughly about 6 million Filipinos who are Muslims. No? And in Mindanao, where we are very predominant, we are still a minority with only 24,000 or 23.39% of the 24,000 population in Mindanao. And statistically, we are also always on top of the two poorest region, highest in poverty incidence, and Lanao del Sur, where the Islamic city of Marawi is placed, is also considered the poorest among provinces in the whole of the Philippines. Islam in the Philippines, we know that had been here 4 centuries years ago, no? But the resurgence of Islam only came during the opening of the Saudi Arabia to pilgrims, no, to pilgrimage, and with it, our employment in Saudi Arabia, bringing different brand of Islam, no, Islam that is also embracing some sort of Wahhabism, no, in its philosophical interpretation, no. The reason also why I have to differentiate the two responses of Muslim Filipinos to government historical injustices to the Moro people is that so that we can differentiate some movements here in the Philippines calling for right to self-determination and the movements that are associated with religious extremism. The first is the movements like the Moro National Liberation Front and the Moro Islamic Liberation Front that in the 60s and 70s, no, started in the 60s and 70s, was a response to the government's all-out wars, martial law. It was their armed revolution for right to self-determination and secession was a response to government's military occupation in Mindanao, no, and it's also a defense, no, against these destructive operations that included aerial bombardment, no, not just the mortar shelling, and this continues until now in some Moro communities, despite of the peace negotiation or the signing of the final peace negotiation with these groups, no. So hence the continuance also of the responses of other armed groups like the Bangsamoro Islamic Freedom Fighters and other groups. But we have to differentiate it with the groups that call themselves the ISIS in Southeast Asia or the ISIS in the Philippines. No, these groups claim that they are part of that international network, no, and we have to differentiate it because even the people in the community do not recognize, no, these kinds of groups because it doesn't show or it doesn't reflect what Islam is practiced in most of the Moro or Bangsamoro communities in Mindanao. Now, as we said, there was a resurgence of Islam here in the 50s, no, when Philippines opened to pilgrimage in Mecca. But most of the madrasa here and most of the mosques and masjids here, no, they do not have a standard teaching of Islam, meaning what reflects what Islam is, what the teachings reflect are those that they had been exposed to if they studied in Medina, or if they studied in Lahore, Pakistan, or if they studied in Al Azhar University in Egypt. So they have different influences. Therefore, the communities also have embraced different influences. But it was never about extremism. It was never about the extreme interpretation. And when we say extreme, it means that they are disregarding or teaching, no, disregarding our Christian communities, our Christian brothers and sisters, or disregarding the relationship that we had with our Christian neighbors and in the other indigenous peoples neighbors. No, we have a long history of relationship with Christians because, as you know, in the history of the Philippines, Mindanao had became under the American period. The plantations were opened. No, Mindanao was called the Promised Land, and when plantations, American plantations, were opened, workers and farmers from Luzon and Visayas, mostly Christians, no, were invited to own large tract of lands in Mindanao to serve as farmers to this banana plantation, pineapple plantation, and rubber plantations. No, so the peopling or the settling of Christian settlers in Mindanao happened during the American period. And what the people or other historians describe as the Muslim-Christian conflict is actually rooted about the government's policy on land owning. So that's the problem, because when they speak of land, like land distribution, land ownership, no, associated with it is the discrimination of the government to national minorities like the indigenous people or the Lumad people in Mindanao and the Moro people. So that should be placed in the context of why there was a quote-unquote Muslim and Christian conflict. But it's not actually about religion. It's more about the policy of the government on land. No, so reactions to Christians in the Philippines or Christian settlers in Mindanao it varies, no, from different groups, no. So when the Abu Sayyaf group and this ISIS self-described group, no, started, no, their campaign about establishing Islamic state in Mindanao, we have to speak out that this is not the reality, and this is not the proper context also, or the concrete condition in Mindanao. We have a long interfaith tradition here of Muslims, Christians, and Lumads gathering together in search for peace, in search of unity, and we do not want that destroyed. So if these groups spouse or campaigns for that, we have to question the legality, legitimacy, or where do this group come from. So if we look deeper into the Abu Sayyaf group, the ISIS group, no, we always come up with a question of who made this group and what is its purpose. So we found out that, of course, it's a part of the counterinsurgency and counterterrorism campaign or policy of countries like the U.S. No, and CIA played a great part in CIA and the Armed Forces of the Philippines Intelligence Section play a great part in forming this group. Why? Because if there are groups like this in Mindanao, in our communities in Mindanao, then military operations, no, becomes legitimate in our communities, especially when they say that we are cuddling these terrorists. No? And for how many decades now, they've been using that excuse, and we always expose that, no? But the problem is succeeding presidents, administration, like our president now, President Rodrigo Duterte, is using this against our people. So having said that, it doesn't thrive in our community because that is not the Islam that we were exposed to. That is not the Islam that we have studied in the madrasa, that in the Friday Jama'ah prayers are not the usyat or the messages, no, being given to us by the by our imam, by the ustads in the community. However, if we listen to these groups and their practices as told to us by some of those who have experienced or who have been exposed, to their presence in their communities, the reason also why they don't like this group to thrive is their tendency to...
Amira, should we stop here now, and then you will have another 5 minutes later?
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Wassalamualaikum to you.
Okay, thank you, friends. We heard already 5 panelists. They presented different perspectives, irrespective of the religious identities of the majority people in those countries. At the same time, we were able to hear some parallels with regard to the situations and issues and trends in these 5 countries presented by 5 panelists. Well, we shall be getting more opportunities to further sharpening some of these issues and trends. And then we will listen the same group of panelists. They will be addressing these issues mainly in the context of legal protection and constitutional rights. So how effective are the legal protection and the constitutional guarantees of freedom of religion, which is enshrined in almost every constitution of all these countries in Asia? As the judiciary, how far the judiciary in respective countries been effective in protecting the people and their religious freedom, and especially ensuring the rights and dignity of women in their society. And also at the same time, the panelists are requested to speak on the issues related to specific examples of best practices to deal with the growing religious intolerance, and also a specific way of protecting the rights of women in these countries. So these are the issues and these are the questions to be addressed in this segment, which we deal with legal protection and constitutional rights. We will start with Dr. Sarasu Esther Thomas, then Azia Nasir, then Ruby Khalifa, then Amira Ali, and Nandita Biswas. So may I request now Dr. Sarasu Esther Thomas to start?
Right. Thank you once again. And I think this section is very important because it links the context that we have just gone through to the specific legal protections which exist. And I must say I'm partial to this section, being from the legal fraternity myself. So as far as India is concerned, our basic law is the Constitution of India. And the Constitution has a number of protections which ensure that if your rights are violated, you can directly approach the High Court of your state or the Supreme Court through what is called writ jurisdiction. The Constitution of India is a document which came up through a lot of debate. And in preparation for today's class, when I went through some of the processes for, during the time of the creation of the Constitution, I noticed that even at the time of the Constituent Assembly debates, there were a number of debates on what was called the propagation of religion, which of course, in other words, deals with freedom to convert to a different faith. When the Constitution came up in its final form, we see that the freedom of religion is clearly there. It appears in two places in the Constitution. One is in the preamble, where India is a secular state. The second is in the Fundamental Rights chapter, where it is a fundamental right of every citizen to have freedom of conscience. So freedom of religion is a fundamental right, and if your right is violated, you can move the High Court or Supreme Court directly in order to enforce that right. It has also been held by the court in what was called the basic structure doctrine to be part of the basic structure of the Constitution, meaning it is a part of the Constitution which cannot be changed. If we look at the Constitution, we see that there is only one specific enumerated minority right. The freedom of religion and conscience is available to everyone, including minorities. The only specific minority right available is the freedom to set up and administer educational institutions. For women, the Constitution allows affirmative action, and that is something which is heartening to all of us today. Under the criminal law system, however, we see that many states individually have what are called the Freedom of Religion Acts, which actually do the opposite. They take away the freedom of religion and put a lot of barriers in the process of conversions. There are higher penalties in most of these freedom of religion laws if women are converted. We also see that though these laws have been challenged, they have been upheld by courts. We see that the criminal law system also deals with violence against women, all women, especially rape, and women from marginalized groups are especially subject to this form of violence. We see that the criminal law system is also now trying to, and there have been challenges to make sure it's more inclusive to cover both cis women as well as trans women. The criminal law system has been quite critical of honor killings and ka panchayats, but we see that in reality, many of these honor killings go scot-free or with minimal punishments. In the civil law system, we see that there are laws such as the dealing with the sex ratio, like the Preconception and Prenatal Diagnostic Techniques Act, because we see better ratios for tribals and minority groups like Christians. We find that trafficking for marriage among these groups are especially vulnerable for offenses like trafficking for marriage in other communities which have women deficit. India has traditionally had free marriage laws, including the Special Marriage Act, which is a liberal legislation allowing people from different groups to marry. And now there are cases pending in courts which are also pushing for allowing trans people and same-sex marriages under the Special Marriage Act. It's a liberal legislation which is now under threat because of everyone clamping down on marrying. There have been some positive cases. Many of you have possibly heard of the Hadia case, which was a case of a woman who had converted to Islam and much later married a Muslim man. It was challenged in court that the marriage was against her parents' wishes and that she had converted, and it was a forced conversion and the marriage was a void one. The case went up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court clearly upheld the right of the woman to convert. It upheld the right of an adult woman to make free choices with regard to her marriage, and was extremely critical of the processes, the government processes which existed, which jumped into play to deny the woman her agency. But although we do have positive outcomes like the Supreme Court's decision in Hadia, although we do have an active women's movement and civil society which speaks out for minority women, which speaks out in cases of rape, saying that rapes of minority women should receive the same kind of protection and attention as rapes of what are called middle class or upper caste or majority community women. So though we do have an active women's movement and civil society, We do see that also in many places, they have a lot of constraints, including that of funds in the recent past. And these are issues that we need to address. We need a strong civil society and women's movement, and we need more positive cases from courts in order to ensure that the protections we have under the Constitution, the criminal law system, and the civil law system are available to all women. I could go on, but I know my time is up. So let me now hand this back to the organizers. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Sarasu Esther Thomas. The next speaker is Ms. Azia Nasir. Ms. Nasir?
Yes, I'm here.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yes, coming to the second part, and I was just listening to her that about the laws in India. I must say that the Constitution of the Pakistan, the very Constitution of the Pakistan, it guarantees equality, and it says that wherein the adequate provision shall be made to safeguard the legitimate interest of minorities and backward and depressed classes. But here I must say that most of the time we say that our Constitution guarantees equality, but in practice it does not, because there are contradictions and there are conflicts in our very basic national documentation, that is the that is our Constitution. It says at one place it says that all men and women are equal before law. But at the same time, we say that there is another article which says that only a Muslim man can be a president, a prime minister, or can hold key positions. So women and minorities, they have no access to these highest positions in the country. So how can we say that the Constitution guarantees equality? Secondly, as I already said, that we are also facing impunity of law here in Pakistan, because at many places, and there are many precedents where we have seen that the Supreme Court of Pakistan has made some decisions, has given some judgments regarding the safeguard and protection of minorities, but those directions or those judgments have never been implemented or never been taken into consideration by the government. For instance, I can give one precedent. In 2014, the Supreme Court of Pakistan took a very historical judgment regarding the safeguard and protection of minorities living in Pakistan, and say that the government should take immediate affirmative actions to protect the minorities. But still we have seen that the government has not fully implemented that. Still we are lagging a commission for the status of minorities here in Pakistan, which is not independent, which is not autonomous, and it has been established by the order of the executive. Secondly, here when we come to the women, that our women in Pakistan, the Christian women, as I told, that they are facing a lot of problems, because still we have not made provisions in our Christian family laws. Our divorce law is still under discussion, and still the denomination and congregations are not coming to a consent. So the Christian women is facing a lot of problems, and when it goes to the court, since we don't have any divorce law, since our family laws are ambiguous, so the Christian women has to go through a lengthy judiciary procedures. Secondly, when it comes to the forced conversions, and when the cases are taken to the court, recently I can quote a case of a minor, 14-year minor, Arzu Raja. She was forcefully converted and married to a 45-year-old Muslim man. So the court, when the case was taken to the court decided and denounced her marriage, because she's a minor. She's 14 years, and the law of the country says that only 18-year-old girl or boy can have the right to marry on their own. So she was a minor. The court denounced her marriage, but at the same time, the court didn't even took up the case of her conversion. The court never decided that whether she's converted or not, and court deciding that she is Muslim because she has converted to Islam, directed to send her to some shelter home. So the Christian community here, they were very furious, and this is for the first time that we were on one page. The civil society and our church leadership stood for this case, but still the court did not take any notice of all our demands and whatever we were expecting from the court, and they only denounced her religion, but still she is considered as a Muslim and sent to a shelter home. So this is a normal practice in Pakistan. The courts, they are reluctant to even take the cases of forced conversions. The thing is that who's going to decide that it is a forced conversion or not? The girls, the minors, the minorities, they are marginalized, living on the edge. They receive life threats. The girls are threatened that their families will be murdered, their families will be victimized. So definitely under threat, they accept or they convert to other religion. And then at many places, the courts, the judges, means the law says, the constitution says that judiciary is independent and they are autonomous, but it's not like that. Many times they are also influenced by the civil society, and the courts take decisions under influence. So I think that the laws and the constitutions needs to be revised, needs to be go through. And similarly, I think that it's very important platform, and I think that Christian Conference of Asia can take up this with different churches, with the church leadership, to decide our family laws, especially our divorce laws, because most of the time the girls who are converting or who are escaping are because we have to face very complicated our Christian family laws. So I think that first of all, we need to take it, we need to do a lot of intra-faith before going into interfaith. So these are some of my reservations, and these are some of my experiences, which I really want to share with you all. And I'm hopeful that all our recommendations will be taken up with the church all over, so that first we can safeguard our women at our home level, at a church, at congregation, and then we can go and talk at a higher level, at the country level, with the governments, with the judiciary. So these were some of the reservations which I really wanted to make with you. Thank you very much, Dr. Matthew.
Thank you, Ms. Nasir. I request now Ruby Khalifa.
Yeah, thank you. After Reformasi 1998, Indonesia achieved a lot of progress in terms of the legal reform. And particularly when we talk about the protection of women and children, we almost have, I think, 100 legal reform in Indonesia. One is in special in tackling gender-based violence. We have specific law relating with protection of women from domestic violence. And the other reform that we are happy to see, actually, institutional reform on gender inequality and women empowerment. We have specific Ministry of Women Empowerment. We have 3 Human Rights Commission, in specific commission for violence against women and the protection of the children. And also we have vibrant civil society that ready to advocate for gender equality and women empowerment. In particular, responding for freedom of religion, one of the big reform in our country is actually for the amendment of the Constitution. It is very much complete. It's reflecting the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, in particularly for the Article 28 and the Article 29 explicitly mention about the freedom of religion, freedom of expression, freedom of speech, and freedom of assembly. So it shouldn't have a problem. However, the Human Rights Commission received in 2019 23 cases of violation of freedom of religion, and in the period of 2015 to 2018, average they received 21 cases, meaning that we still have a lot of problem and gaps in terms of the implementation of the Constitution. Why? One, it is because there is a regulation number 1 in 1965 relating with prevention of blasphemy, and also the criminal code in Article 156A that's often be translated by the authority that actually against the minority in particular. Not all, but some cases we actually hearing that the judge did not give justice for the minority. One of case that I can share with you is the case of the Miss Meliana from the North Sumatra, that actually only gossiping about the voices of the mosque, the azan, the calling of the salat is too loud, and then the neighbor actually reporting to other neighbors, then become mass panic, and that actually creating a serious. But unfortunately, the judge actually punished the Miss Meliana. Was bad precedent in Indonesia because we're embracing democracy and we want to see more and more justice. One of the good development in terms of the legislation is also Indonesia has the policy of the Attorney General number 3 year 2017 in specific providing guidance for judging women before law. So that's actually the regulation is intended to protect the women from seeking sexual violence, seeking sexual history or gender bias, and some of the approach done by the judge, so that actually strictly implemented, but of course we still have some gap. I would like to share with you good practices that our organization and government dealing with the freedom of religion. In the case of advocating Shia faith minority in Indonesia that got attacked in 2011, we and other civil society joining in the consortium and helping the Shia to settle in the new places temporarily. And we found difficulty to use the instrument of the ICCPR on the civil rights, and then the way we actually keeping the state to protect the Shia by proposing the rights on ECOSOC and fulfillment of the whole basic needs and the monthly allowance for Shia during living in temporarily settlement. But this need to be engaged more by other approach that actually we are able to promote a tolerance among young generation in order to understand the differences within Muslims, so it not create tension in the future. Other important issue that I would like to raise here is also the importance to address women leadership when we do advocacy on freedom of religion. In the case of Shia, for example, comparing to other faith minority, the women leadership is very low. Even the rate of literacy is very low. So the way we actually approach this case is teaching the women to read, to be able to read and write and understand the situation and their rights in order to not them easily to sign any document that actually propose for them, because it may actually harmful their life. So that is very much working, and then the women become more educated. And the other, we also raising voices of the women ulama that actually need to be to speak loud, relating with pluralism, multiculturalism, including the protection of the victim of sexual violence. And the women ulama in Indonesia very active in advocating the bill on eradicating sexual violence and opening debate relating with religious justification why we need to have soon the legislation. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Now, Ms. Amira Ali.
Yes, Assalamualaikum again. Yes, in the Philippines, we also have that those laws that recognize empowerment of women, no? Just as the government has signed under the numerous agreements with the UN, no, to recognize all standards of human rights, women empowerment, or recognition of religion. No? In the Philippines, we also, being a minority, so there are some laws, no, that are accepted by the Philippine Constitution. For example, in the Sharia law, only the civil, not the criminal laws are accepted. Like there's a code of Muslim and personal code of Muslim personal laws, no, that defines or recognizes the rights of Muslims in terms of marriage, in terms of their rights to properties, no. So this all of these rights, no, are recognized on paper, but it depends on the government, or these are over or undermined, no, overridden whenever there's a big campaign of the government against terrorism, and it affects all of us because it the attack of the government uh, is against the community. So it affects all of us, even though the community is not recognizing the groups that embraces extremism or extremist views. No, we are paying, no, for the presence of these groups. No, and we call it discriminatory, these policies, because the government is like pointing only to the Muslim people as if we are the only ones who are embracing extremist views. But whenever they use the name of God to replace an Islamic community or a community that they are bombing, no, they are going to give back or return the Philippines there, or return the flag there, or return the religion there. Now it's discriminatory, and it's an insult to us, because it reminds us that we are still a minority here, and despite of the constitutional provisions, despite of our recognition of an autonomous region in our in Mindanao, despite of the recognition of the identity of the Bangsamoro, whenever the government has a campaign against terrorism, it's discriminatory, and it affects all of us as a community, as a religious community. So that's a that's the sad reality in our place. Thank you.
Thank you, Amira. Next, Ms. Nandita Biswas.
Thank you again. Actually, Constitution of Bangladesh has remained very secular for practicing religion and other practice like freedom of movement, freedom of religion, and rights of properties under 41, 42, and 43 article. So it's remained very secular, and we have also law under Ministry of Law and Ministry of Women and Children. That is, we have Prevention and Protection Act 2010, Domestic Violence Prevention and Protection Act, law of prohibiting dowry under DVPB, and Child Marriage Resistant Act 2017, Acid Control Act 2002, Women and Children Prevention Act 2000. So we have many laws, and also Bangladesh are signatory international law like Cedaw, that is Convention on Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination and Against Women. So ICCPR also, and lots of UN law we are signatory, but actually we have so many wonderful things in our national action plan, but um, when we look back or look in the field, it's not happening actually. We are actually failed in our grassroots level and in our field level actually. So we have law, but no order, um, mm, no implementation. So this is the reality of our country. Um, so it's our reality. We want to change. Many women activists like Mohila Parishad, Bangladesh Mohila Parishad, and also Bangladesh Women Forum, they are very aware and actively work about this law to implementing, but it's not working. And the other thing is we have common law, and by other hand, we have 4 different personal law, that is the Hindu law, Muslim law, and Christian personal law, and Buddhist personal law. Especially the Muslim law, women are discriminated by the law, and also Hindu personal law. It's very uh, uh, old law. We are adapting from British government actually, and need to reform our law, because our law, personal law, dominating women, and scripture also dominating women. So need time to change it. We are trying to act. We are trying to work for changing the law. It will be happen. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nandita. Well, friends, we have heard again specific contexts and specific situations related to legal protection, then constitutional guarantees. There are different kinds of mechanisms existing in different countries. National laws we can apply, international laws we can apply, but despite all these constitutional guarantees, the question is how far our countries have been successful in implementing, or we have been successful in the area of the practical application of these constitutional guarantees. These are the questions that we need to raise, continuously to raise, for which we need to have certain levels or certain kinds of advocacy that is required at different levels, and also for which we need to have a proper collaborative efforts by different groups and different sectors in society, including the faith-based organizations, because we cannot simply leave this only in the hands of the governments or in the hands of the judiciary or only in the hands of certain NGOs or civil society groups. Here, the role of faith-based organizations also are relevant. So now we are coming to the last part of the last segment of this session, where we will be discussing on advocacy and collaborations, mainly to combat growing religious extremism and violence against women in the name of religion, whatever is happening in different Asian countries. So we all agree one thing, that nurturing religious freedom and religious harmony that require joint and collaborative actions. And we are asking the panelists that can you recommend any specific Asian models or examples for effective advocacy to end the discriminations we have already heard from different panelists from different countries and different contexts. These are happening against women each and every moment in our countries and in our communities, in our societies. So what kind of a common strategy, or how can we evolve a common strategy for ending discrimination against women on the basis of religion by religious extremist groups and fundamentalist groups are engaged in these days? We heard the statements by the panelists that religion itself is not the real problem, but there are different groups and different sectors are directly involved for their political motives and their own other personal interests. They are discriminating people in the name of religion and in the name of discriminating them on the basis of their minority status or their sexual orientations in different contexts and different countries in Asia. So we raise these common questions to three of our panelists, Ms. Leslie Davies, who comes from the UN organization, UN Women, and Mr. Basil Fernando, who has been heading the Asian Human Rights Commission for now almost 3 decades and very widely experienced in advocacy and even at the global level, and Dr. Sarasu Esther Thomas, who has been working with one of the most prestigious and most prominent law institutions in India. So these three panelists will be sharing with us on these specific questions. May I request now to start, request Leslie Davies to start to address these questions, and then Mr. Basil Fernando, and then Dr. Sarasu Esther Thomas.
Hello. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you, Dr. Matthews, for the second introduction. And thank you so much to all of the panelists. This has been an absolutely fascinating session with so many unique points of view that I don't get to hear very often in my day-to-day. So I just want to take a few minutes to detail what UN Women Regional Office for Asia and the Pacific has learned from our programming and research that might be applicable to advocacy and collaboration to combat religious extremism and violence against women within, churches and congregations and religious groups. So just 3 points. The first point that UN Women, really wants to stress is that empowerment of women in itself is a preventative factor to extremism. So we have many studies that show that when societies and communities are more peaceful or are more gender equal, they're actually more peaceful. So this in itself is a strategy. Women can and are highly influential leaders within their communities. They're central to the ideologies of many religious extremist groups. As Dr. Sarasu said, women are the upholders of culture. So women are very influential within their own communities, and they can and are already advocating for gender equality within their families and religious groups and communities. But they need our support. They need our support with resources, by being given platforms like this one to share their work and to gain support. And they need moderate religious organizations, advocacy in the public sphere and with governments to push back on threats that we've seen recently to women's rights. We did an analysis of UN Women programming, which was focused solely on women's empowerment in communities that were at risk of religious extremism. And we found that when women were the focus of these activities to prevent this violence and extremism in the community, it actually had a trickle effect to the rest of the community. So not just women who we surveyed, who were a part of our project, but actually men in the community as well reported that they knew more about extremism and how to prevent it. So that's point one. Secondly, I think that this is a battle that's really fought and won with our youth. In 2018, UN Women conducted a research to measure the appetite for religious extremist materials online. The research looked at Indonesia, Malaysia, the Philippines, and Bangladesh, and it looked at 2 main sources of information. So metadata from online search traffic from Google and publicly available Facebook data. And we had 3 main findings with regards to those who are searching for extremist content online. In all of the countries, the majority of searches were performed by the youngest age ranges in our study. So from 18 to 24, and from 25 to 34. So that shows you that the youth are the ones who are online kind of consuming this extremist content for the most part. And further, the number of searches for content related to violent extremism tends to decrease with each increasing age range. And lastly, we saw that with much of the extremist content and material online from violent extremist groups, it actually appeared to be targeting youth. So these groups recognize that youth, and especially female youth, are very, very important to their ideology, and they're especially important to ensuring the continuation of such extremist groups. This is an age when young people are looking for answers, they're looking to make a difference, and they're looking for role models wherever they can find them. So it's a vulnerable age, but it's also an extremely powerful one. So I think engaging youth, especially female youth, is extremely important within, our congregations, within our religious groups, and within our advocacy efforts, and not just engaging them, but allowing them to lead and to really set the agenda. And the last point that I wanted to make is that it's really important that we talk, of course, about women and women's empowerment, but we also need to start discussing kind of positive forms of masculinity and to engage male champions when we're looking to end discrimination and violence against women by religious extremist groups. Patriarchy and harmful performances of masculinity are really deeply embedded in the modus operandi of extremist groups, as I've said before. Extremist groups often use their rhetoric to kind of tell a story of what it means to be a man, and tell men how to exercise themselves as men. And a lot of times this is about exercising control over women in their community, in their families, and over women's bodies, and women's abilities, their dress, their behavior, their mobility. And this is oftentimes with violence. So this is something that's really important when we're thinking about ending violence against women, is what are these extremist religious groups telling to men? Because they're the ones who are actually perpetrating the violence. We have a lot of discourse on femininity and, women's rights and what femininity should be. And also as part of our activism, there's conversations on what it looks like to be a woman and to break out of this kind of like outdated model of, femininity where women have no rights, but we really don't have any discussion about men and masculinity. The other thing is, we don't really have any narratives around what it looks like to be a good man. We have narratives around powerful men, around strong men, around men who assert themselves, but there's not really any discussion about like, what does a strong religious man look like, who supports gender equality, who supports women, who's happy to take a second seat to a woman to let her shine. So I think because men don't even have the language to discuss what this looks like, it's really hard to kind of make that transition between this kind of hegemonic masculinity to a very gender equal and supportive masculinity just within our societies and within our religions. So we need to discuss masculinity, and we need to give men alternative ways of expressing their masculinity and their power. And one of the best ways to do that is through our advocacy, and also through engaging strong male role models like the ones that we have on the call today when we're doing advocacy on this type of work. So that's all my points, and I'll turn it over now to the other two speakers.
Thank you, Leslie. Mr. Basil Fernando. Basil, are you there?
Yeah, thank you very much. It has been a very good discussion with so much of information. I just want to get down to a more practical level. I think we have, I'm talking also with the practical experience of trying to follow a different model of human rights for both on all human rights, including the women's rights. First element of it is forget about text, legal text, whether it is the text about constitution or the particular text or even the signing of UN documents. Battle is not there. Battle is in the implementation of law, not articulation of law. Articulation can go on, but that is not the primary area. Primary area is the implementation of law. And the law, particularly in terms of violence, intolerance, takes place particularly in the area of the criminal law. And the criminal law means proper complaint taking when the people have problems, providing of protection to make themselves heard. Secondly, investigations, thorough, proper investigations. Thirdly, fair trials. All these areas in all the countries that you have mentioned, because I have been working on about 11 countries in Asia. Our legal systems are, cannot, out of 100, they cannot even get 10% marks. Including today, India. India was one time some place where we thought is better than other places. But the below, it's such a, sometime it is below zero, your performance in terms of the police, if they come to investigations, in terms of even to getting even, so first area is how to work on implementation. Work on implementation, then you have to develop methods of observing the implementation. What happens when you go to make a complaint? Say, for example, there are domestic the violence laws in all these countries. What has happened to those laws? We conduct a survey, and almost about 60 women we interviewed from different countries. All of them say, if I have a problem, I don't want to go to the police, because I will have more problems. So we are talking about law without law enforcement capacity, and it's going to negative side. Take Philippines. When you have a more corrupt policing system than what we have in Philippines or Bangladesh, we have observed. I'm talking out of long experience of collecting huge amount of data on these things. In Bangladesh court, just about 2-3 weeks back, a girl who was minor girl who was raped, and then the man was arrested and was with not given bail, and the judge said that there should be a marriage. Marriage should take place in the prison, and then he can get bail. That's the level to which some of our judges, many of them, work. If the Supreme Court judge can be just dismissed for any kind of disagreement, like that happened in several countries. What is the law we are talking about? So this is where there is a far difference between a developed country's way of talking human rights and the less developed countries' ways in the countries in Asia, where we have to talk about human rights. We don't have the institutional protection. How to create that? One way to create it is that civil society organizations, women's organizations, gain the orientation from merely talking about laws, having monitoring of courts, monitoring of police, monitoring of prosecutors, monitoring of what happens in each of the instances where women go to court. What happens? You will be shocked what you hear. Since there's no time, I can't narrate these stories, but we are daily shocked, in a state of shock. The level to which rape is ignored, sexual abuse is ignored. 17 years, 18 years going to court for a single instance of a problem. having to pay bribes at every point. These are practical problems. Without that, empowerment means fighting against practical obstacles. Otherwise, we will be empowered in words, but in real life, there is no empowerment. So that is the first, the positive area that I have seen, and particularly in Sri Lanka, is among the civil society, which for about at least 10 years, last 10 years, their concentration is not about this text. But what happens at the practical level, they train their people, they go to court, they help the victims, particularly women's victims, and they report. Second area, if you want to fight, is the use of communications to talk about actual problems. Actually, what happens when you go to protect your right. Today, more than ever, I think the most powerful tool we have in the world today is the capacity to freely communicate these matters with the least amount of cost. But it takes an effort, and also the communication skill. Sit down and write down day to day. This is what happens. This is what happens. With that, you can change public opinion. Most people don't think things are that bad. We have that experience in places. Only when we give a huge amount of instances, tell them, look at it. If you want your society to be like that, people open up. Because we all like to forget. We hear today one thing, we don't forget. But over a month, if we collect what happens, and then put it together and say, see, this is what societies are like, then you can change the discourse. So the communication aspect. Secondly, developing the sophistication enough to convince our middle classes. It is a middle class indifference. The people who are making opinion makers most of the time come from the middle class. And these people, for most part, in Asian context, they are indifferent to human suffering, and particularly the kind of problems that we are talking in terms of women's movement. But mere reporting and things like that, what the human rights organizations do, cannot change their minds. We must enter into the discourse in a more sophisticated way and get into the debates, various debates, and for that we have to develop skills. In other words, if you are talking about fighting against intolerance in any form, particularly regarding the women's issue, it's one of the most difficult tasks humanity has ever fought in every country. You know that there were long periods people fought on religion, they killed each other, in the best of today's for the civilized countries. We have not gone through that period. So then the violence level is very high. And only way to fight is also, mere surface activism is not enough. So in-depth activism, trying to understand, trying to get the messages across, and there you will find there are many friends in both in all genders. There are people who are waiting to support the cause of strongly support the women's movement, because they see not only as women's issue, it is a future of the world. This world as it is not worth living in. It is a kind of a terrible world in which the meanness, indifference, cruelty, murder, all these things are happening at a scale, a highly organized scale, supported by very powerful governments and other agencies. So it's a difficult task. I think one of the things to realize is fighting intolerance is a difficult task. It requires a mind and more understanding of psychology and communicating capacity. And the people It is not everybody suffering from this. It is not few people who suffer from this. So the people who want to hear a good message, people who want to respond are many. They are few, we are many, more than any other time. The phrase from Shelley, I think, is very relevant. But many don't hear a message that can, to push them. So I think if we go into this field, we are getting into enormous possibilities. But whether we are capable of exploiting these enormous possibilities, that is left to us. Thank you.
Thank you, Basil. Now, Dr. Sarasu.
Thank you again, Dr. Chunakara. I agree completely with both what Leslie and Basil have said. I feel that, when we are talking about women and violence against women in general, very often we are not using the intersectionalities approach. I'm glad that this webinar is doing that. It's trying, of course, we understand that all women face violence and discrimination, but this webinar tries to look at how this works as far as religion is concerned. Clearly, one of these intersectionalities is religion. And we do know that women from minority religions in any majority system are subject to greater discrimination and greater violence. But within this group, we also need to look at some groups who are often left out. And these include, women from poorer sections, because class is a huge, factor when you're looking at access to justice. Just for a woman to be able to go and complain or to be able to access, the legal system, there is a class issue. So we need to create support systems which do address this, which make it possible for women who have suffered violence to be able to access justice efficiently. So class is, of course, a concern. In countries like India, caste is also a concern. And this could also be read as tribe or other identity, because they suffer from additional prejudices that other women don't. Gender is a concern. We usually talk about cis women, but not about trans women, even in minority circles. Disability is a concern which is rarely voiced. I think in addition, when we are looking at solutions, we must remember that there may not be a one-size-fits-all kind of a model. We may need to look at models which work for women in different communities. The other thing that I would like to emphasize on is that we must propagate a human rights culture in any way that we can. And I keep telling my students and others that I speak to that in India, whatever be our culture, we should have a constitutional culture. That should be the supreme document. This may happen through education, as some speakers have mentioned in the earlier sessions. It can happen through increasing opportunities in different fields for women. It can happen, as Leslie has pointed out, by challenging patriarchy. Patriarchy must be challenged at all spheres, otherwise change will not be possible. And it must happen through law reform that Basil has spoken about. And when we look at law reform, we see that very often it is used as a tool, either to show that, oh, look at you, you minorities are backward because you have backward laws, without any attempt being made to change the law. But we also see that in cases like India, the reforms that have happened both in Muslim law in the recent past on triple talaq and in Christian law on grounds for divorce for Christian men and women have been largely from right-wing governments to say that, look, we are the people who are, protecting minority women. We are the ones who are concerned about minority rights. And we must, therefore, as minorities in communities, wherever we are, try to ensure that, we are open to and we change our laws to benefit the women who live within communities. I think it is clear from all the women who spoke in the first two sessions that discrimination and violence is faced by most women from within their own communities rather than without. However, I would add a word of caution as far as legal reforms are concerned, because we know that even in communities with the best possible laws, the extra legal norms of culture have, and patriarchy, of course, have a greater control than legal norms. So we do need to challenge societies. We need to have allies who are from different walks of life. And this is, challenging patriarchy is not something that women should do. It's a joint effort by men and women. So we must look for allies from across the board. I think it's also a time for self-reflection and reforms from within communities. Girls and boys need good role models within and without. If they see power being wielded in their families and in their communities only by men, they're going to be socialized in patriarchal modes. And that will be a given, and it will be automatic. I think as groups, this is something that we do need to address. We need to speak out for women everywhere. And in this day of internet and social media, I think if there is a concern in Nepal or the Philippines, we should put it out in common fora, in solidarity. It is not very difficult to do that, and it is quite possible. And I think that building those linkages are something that we can easily do without much financial outlay. It just needs a little bit of organization from our part. And I think, this webinar can be a kick off for an initiative like this, that we raise voices for women in other Asian countries, whether it be one incident or many incidents. I think we need to keep, not be silent, not be blinkered to looking at only our own social context, and reach out to women everywhere in whatever way we can. Okay, I know some of this sounds very pithy, and this is an old problem. I don't think it is easy to find a quick fix solution, nor is it easy to find a one-size-fits-all solution. But we need to keep working at some solutions in order to see what clicks and what doesn't, and what is workable for a group like this and what isn't. I wish you all the best in all the efforts that everyone here is taking to improve the situation of all women everywhere. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sarasu. Friends, well, we originally thought of concluding everything within 2 hours, but now we are running a little bit behind the schedule. However, we need to take some more time for questions or comments. So the easiest way is that some of you have already raised certain questions, and my colleagues have now summarized those questions, or they have filtered those questions. And now I shall request my colleague Ruth Mathan to raise these questions. Then we will decide, or we will agree that which one among the panelists will address or respond to these questions. Ruth, can you just share with us these questions? Can you filter it and then raise some important questions here?
Yes, Dr. Matthews. Thank you to all the panelists. There are 2 questions that have come in that are of a general nature. The third question is posed to our panelist, Ms. Leslie from the UN. The first question is about looking inwards for churches. What should the response of churches be towards Christian extremism itself, and how can this look like with the reinterpretation and reconstructing scripture, especially those parts that are discriminatory? So the first question is about looking inwards. It's come from Virginia and Hartian. The second question is about the general COVID-19 pandemic situation. Why has there been a rise in violence against women? Why are these reports coming in under the pandemic? What are the causes for it? And the third question to Ms. Leslie is, what are the ramifications of the online education systems that we're seeing? As you mentioned, we're seeing that the youngest in the age range in your studies are those who are looking for extremist content. So can this be related to the fact that education is now moving to the online mode? So Dr. Matthews, those are the three questions. The first is looking inwards, how churches can respond to extremism within our own communities. The second is about the trends of violence under the pandemic. And the third is about about online education and the impact that it's having on children and their exposure to extremist content. Thank you.
So the first question, I would suggest that either Mr. Basil Fernando or Dr. Sarasu Esther Thomas, one of them can respond to that. And then, of course, the third question is specifically to Ms. Leslie, and the second question, any one of them can respond. So who will be in a position to respond to the first question with regard to Christian extremism?
I just briefly mention a few things, then maybe the other person can join. I think, it's inward looking is what the religion is all about. And if a religion is incapable of looking inward and being self-critical, then that is where the problem is. That if you go, of course, there's no time to go in deeply into the whole issue. In all the basic the religions, the first is what is going back and going inward. In a world that is completely extrovert, religion's specific contribution is it is inward looking. And when you look inward, you cannot be to have a double standard. So there are a lot of things in the religion which is acquired, once again, not for religious reasons, but for very worldly reasons. In the past, there are patriarchy and so many other things are developed in terms of administration, in terms of running administration, in terms of protecting property, and all kinds of things which do not belong to the core of values represented by religion. Therefore, necessarily, it should be inward looking, critical, and understand that certain histories are gone. There are certain essences which are permanent in civilization. There are many things which happened and people adjusted those times, and those get embedded also in religion. And we must have the capacity to, undo what belongs to a certain times and certain limitations of the past, and to more dynamically truly look inward, so that and be authentic to individual as well as the community.
Thank you. Yes, Dr. Sarasu.
All right. I think where, any religion can, of course, be fundamentalist. And that is something that we are all aware of, especially after today's webinar. I would say that we should hold all religions up to two standards. One is the standard which I think Nandita mentioned, the Cedaw, the Convention on Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, which is an international standard. And the Cedaw has a very interesting article, which many countries like India do have reservations or declarations too. But this is Article 5, which is basically a non-stereotyping article, which says that the state shall make laws to ensure that, even societal behavior is changed in order to comply with an equal protection kind of a standard, where the superiority or inferiority of any sex is debunked. I think we need to hold true to that Cedaw standard and hold everyone true to it. All states must make sure that social and cultural patterns of behavior are modified in whatever way they wish, including education or legislation. in order to uphold the values of Cedaw. The other is a standard which is not very often used, but which I think should come in, which is when we look at the constitution of many countries, and many speakers here have pointed out, the positives in their constitution which protect women. We see that very often constitutional standards are applied between state and citizen or between state and individual. But there's a very strong case for applying constitutional standards, not just a vertical application from top down, but also a horizontal application that is between people. So when we are looking at ideals of human rights or constitutional rights, we need to ensure that we have a clear system in place which applies it not just from a top down, from the state to the citizens, but between citizens also, we treat each other with equality. There are already laws which do that to some extent. For instance, in India, you have laws that don't allow untouchability. So that's between citizens. But this is something which I think can be mainstreamed to ensure. And there are also laws like education in many parts of the world which say that you can't not send your daughter to school to get educated. So some of these strategies, I think, can be used, which will prevent communities from taking very insular stands as far as their women or young girls is concerned, to apply international standards and constitutional standards to communities. Thank you.
Thank you. So the second question. Who is
Yes,
going
hello.
Yes.
This is Amira. Yes.
Yes.
Okay. The second question has something to do about COVID and the rise of violence, against women and against community.
Yeah.
Well, the problem with the government is that because of COVID, they have restricted our communities. They have put limitations in our movement, and also it affected our livelihood. But our government continued its business. It's business as usual for them. What they did was, like for example, in the Philippines, the government continued its military programs, like buying more arms from the US. That's in the during the height of COVID-19 pandemic here in the Philippines, and also continued to amass a lot of military arsenal, buying military arsenal, putting more budget on counterinsurgency, red tagging, and prioritizing anti-terror laws rather than prioritizing health, and the health for communities who have lost their livelihoods because of the limitations, on movement and limitations due to COVID-19. Now that has also became a problem to the communities, because instead of people are expecting more health programs, people are expecting nurses and doctors to come to their communities to aid them, in facing this pandemic. But I think because of less budget to the health services, and less budget to help the people, the government here in the Philippines has prioritized military budget. We just recently had a budget hearing in Congress, and they're putting more budget on the attacks on programs that promotes the attack on the rights of people. Now, inside communities, inside our homes, because there are no more livelihoods for the people, the families are affected, especially the women, because they get the burden, of this everyday life that they have in their houses. They do not have budget for the how do you call that, the money for the food in the house. And then because of this online school, they are expected to also be the teachers for their children. So all of this burden are put on the mothers, on the women in our communities. And of course, it's a hard life. And if they speak out, no, there are sometimes many in our communities who cannot understand, no, the position that women were put because of the hardship that we face. And it doesn't help also that we have a very misogynistic president, a president who encourages the men in our community, the men in our country, you know, to do violence against women. And to it's basically, you know, we see him on public degrading, debasing women. So this kind of consciousness, you know, is being promoted by our president. And as I have said, despite of all the international human rights agreement, the Cedaw that the government has signed in, you know, our president and his administration is it becomes nothing, you know, if they continue, or he continues these kinds of campaigns that he has against our people. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, friends, we have been listening several of these panelists, and also we have received number of questions. In fact, we could not respond to all those questions, whatever we have received through this chat box. However, I'm sure that all of you would agree one thing, that this has been a very good exercise, a stimulating exercise for us to reflect more about this issue, this important issue, which is becoming more a serious issue in several Asian countries in Asia's present day context. 2 days or 2 hours or 2 days are not even sufficient for us to really understand the issue or to discuss all the issues related with this particular problem. But one thing at the end, we are now here agreeing that we need to evolve a human rights culture. And addressing the concern of patriarchy is not the responsibility of only women, but it is a collective responsibility. In that particular area, we need more advocacy. Religion itself is not a problem, but the problem lies in different other areas. And many other factors are involved in this, intensifying this problem, the growing trend of religious intolerance and extremism. And also, the effect of this is evident in various ways and different ways in several parts of our society, and certain countries are the worst victims, or women in those societies are the worst victims of this problem. How to address this problem in the coming days? How can we collaborate, and how can we collectively engage in advocacy to address this concern? That should be our major concern, and that should be the focus of, or that will be the outcome of this kind of an exercise that is being facilitated by the Christian Conference of Asia. We are very glad that you could become part of this initiative. And as I mentioned at the very beginning, this is the 8th webinar that we have organized since March, since the end of March. And then we will continue to engage our constituency through this kind of our efforts. And this will be, it has been proved that this has been beneficial for most members in our constituency and beyond our constituency. Although we could provide the space through this Zoom, only limited space for people, those who wanted to be part of it, at the same time through Facebook and also through YouTube. Number of other people also are participating in this webinar, and in that way we are glad that we were able to provide such kind of a platform. So I take this opportunity to express our profound thanks to all panelists, and with such a short notice, several of you or most of you have agreed to be part of this. I take this opportunity again to express our very sincere gratitude to all the panelists, and especially on behalf of my colleagues, those who have been trying to organize this, those who have been taking the lead in organizing this, Mr. Basil Fernando, Ms. Leslie Davids, Professor Dr. Sarasu Esther Thomas, Mrs. Azia Naisir, and Ms. Amira Lidasan, Ms. Rubiandi Khalifa, and Ms. Nandita Biswas. These panelists, again, I express our very deep appreciation and very sincere thanks to each and every one of you. And also all those who have been participating in this webinar. I take this opportunity to again extend our thanks to all of you. Thank you for your being with us. We look forward to your continued support and encouragement in our future programs too. Again, on behalf of all my colleagues and on behalf of the Christian Conference of Asia and on behalf of the Christian Conference of Asia's large constituency, which starts from Iran in West Asia to Japan in East Asia, and from the north of Asia, from Nepal to New Zealand in the south. Many participants, I have seen their faces on the screen that they were from, not only from Asia, beyond Asia, even from Canada, United States, and Europe, and from New Zealand and Australia. Thank you, each and every one of you. We look forward to meet you again in due course. Wish you all a Merry Christmas and a blessed New Year.
Thank you very much,
you all.
everyone.
Stay healthy for everyone.
Okay, we are facing a technical difficulty, but I'm glad that that is happening only at the end.